The summer of 2022 bore down on Briarwood Heights, South Carolina, with an intensity that made the air shimmer. The small suburban town, nestled among rolling hills and sweltering fields, seemed picture-perfect. Children rode their bikes down the cul-de-sac, neighbors exchanged greetings over freshly mowed lawns, and the hum of cicadas filled the heavy evening air. But behind the neatly trimmed hedges and white picket fences of Shady Glen, the Parker family harbored secrets that would soon rip their lives apart. Anna Parker was the kind of woman everyone believed had it all. At 34, she was a devoted wife and mother, living in a cozy two-story home with her husband Ethan and their two children, Caleb, 4, and Sophie, 2. On the surface, Anna's life seemed idyllic, baking cookies for school fundraisers, tending her flower beds, and organizing playdates with other mothers in the neighborhood. Yet, beneath her soft smiles and kind words, Anna felt like a ghost drifting through her own life. Ethan Parker, her husband of 10 years, was a dedicated construction manager who worked long hours to provide for his family. He was the kind of man who believed in hard work, sacrifice, and the American dream. But his commitment to his job often left little time for his wife or children. Early mornings turned into late nights, and while Ethan saw his absence as a testament to his devotion, Anna felt abandoned. The silence between them grew heavier with each passing day, like an unspoken accusation neither dared to voice. Anna's restlessness had started years ago, after Sophie was born. The monotony of changing diapers, scrubbing dishes, and folding laundry seemed to swallow her whole. She longed for something more, something exciting, something that made her feel alive. It was during one of those restless moments that she met Adrian Harper. Adrian was a mechanic at a small garage in West Ashley, Charleston, just a 30-minute drive from Briarwood Heights. The day Anna's car broke down was the day her life took a sharp, irreversible turn. Adrian was charming in a rugged, effortless way. His sun-kissed skin and easy grin made Anna feel seen for the first time in years. What began as casual conversations about oil changes and tire rotations quickly deepened into something far more dangerous. By June, Anna found herself making excuses to visit the garage more frequently. She told herself it was harmless, that Adrian was just a friend, someone who understood her frustrations in a way Ethan never could. But deep down, she knew the truth: Adrian wasn't just a distraction. He was an escape. As the summer heat intensified, so did Anna's deception. The late-night texts, the secret glances, the stolen afternoons, they were a delicate web she wove with care. But like any web, it was fragile, and the threads were beginning to unravel. In the stillness of her kitchen late one evening, Anna stared out the window at the backyard where her children played earlier that day. She couldn't ignore the ache in her chest, the guilt gnawed at her, but so did the longing for freedom. Somewhere in the distance, a storm was brewing, and though she couldn't see it yet, Anna would soon find herself caught in its eye. Anna Parker had always been a dreamer. Growing up in the quiet outskirts of a small southern town, she had spent her childhood imagining a life filled with adventure, passion, and purpose. But as she stood in her tidy kitchen in Briarwood Heights, wiping a smudge of peanut butter off the counter while Caleb tugged at her leg and Sophie wailed from her high chair, those dreams felt like distant, untouchable memories. The girl who had once yearned for the world was now a woman boxed into a life she hadn't fully chosen. Anna's husband, Ethan, was everything she thought she needed when she first met him. 10 years her senior, he had a steadiness about him that felt like an anchor. At 36, Ethan was a respected construction manager, known for his unrelenting work ethic and quiet reliability. His days started before sunrise and often ended long after the kids were in bed. While Ethan believed his absence was a sacrifice for their family's future, Anna saw it differently. Every empty chair at the dinner table, every rushed goodbye, felt like another crack in the foundation of their marriage. Their home in Shady Glen was a snapshot of suburban perfection, but the cracks beneath the surface were growing harder to ignore. Ethan's absence had become more than just physical, it was emotional. When he did come home, he was too exhausted for meaningful conversations. Their once vibrant exchanges had devolved into mechanical discussions about bills, groceries, and the children. Anna, who had always prided herself on her resilience, began to feel invisible. She loved her children fiercely, but the relentless grind of motherhood wore her down. The sleepless nights, the constant demands, and the unending routine began to erode her sense of self. She would often find herself staring at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, searching for the woman she used to be. Was this all there was? Ethan, on the other hand, was oblivious to his wife's growing dissatisfaction. To him, their life was the epitome of success. They had a roof over their heads, healthy children, and financial stability. What more could Anna possibly want? He prided himself on being a provider, convinced that his long hours were a testament to his love for his family. But in his single-minded pursuit of security, he failed to notice that Anna wasn't just lonely, she was drowning. Their interactions became strained, punctuated by brief flashes of frustration. Ethan would brush off Anna's attempts to discuss their relationship, believing she was overreacting. "I'm doing this for us," he would say, a phrase that Anna had come to resent. To her, it felt like a justification for his absence, a way to dismiss her feelings without confronting the growing distance between them. The tipping point came on a warm evening in early June. Ethan had come home late, as usual, and collapsed onto the couch without so much as a hello. Anna, who had spent the entire day juggling housework and tantrums, stood in the doorway, staring at him. She wanted to scream, to demand that he see her, but instead, she turned away and went to bed. That night, as she lay staring at the ceiling, the ache in her chest grew unbearable. It wasn't anger or even sadness, it was emptiness. Anna's isolation was compounded by the subtle judgments of her community. Briarwood Heights was a place where appearances mattered. The other mothers at the park seemed effortlessly put together, their social media feeds filled with photos of homemade crafts and picture-perfect family outings. Anna felt like an outsider, her own struggles hidden behind carefully curated smiles. Ethan's world was equally narrow. At work, he was respected, even admired, but he rarely spoke of his family. His colleagues saw him as a no-nonsense professional, a man who carried the weight of responsibility without complaint. Yet, behind the facade, Ethan was grappling with his own doubts. He had noticed Anna's growing distance but didn't know how to bridge the gap. Conflict was not something he was equipped to handle, he preferred to bury his head in work and hope the storm would pass. In the midst of their unraveling, Anna met Adrian Harper. The chance encounter at the garage where she took her car for repairs seemed insignificant at first, but Adrian's easy smile and attentive nature struck a chord in Anna. Here was someone who listened, someone who made her feel seen. While Ethan saw her struggles as trivial complaints, Adrian validated her emotions in a way that felt intoxicating. Adrian's life was a stark contrast to Ethan's. As a mechanic in Charleston, he worked with his hands, living day-to-day without the burdens of long-term plans or familial obligations. He was charming in a way that felt effortless, his casual confidence masking a darker, more complicated past. Adrian had a way of drawing people in, and Anna was no exception. At first, their conversations were innocent. Anna convinced herself that there was no harm in seeking companionship from someone who understood her frustrations. But the more they talked, the deeper the connection grew. Adrian represented everything Anna felt she had lost: freedom, spontaneity, and a sense of purpose. Ethan, meanwhile, remained oblivious. To him, Anna's preoccupation was just another phase, a temporary mood that would resolve itself. He had no idea that the woman he believed to be his rock was slipping away, caught between her responsibilities and a longing for something more. As the summer wore on, the fragile balance of their lives was about to shatter. In their perfect home on Shady Glen, the stage was set for a tragedy that would leave no one unscathed. The day Anna Parker's car broke down felt like an inconvenience at first. It was a warm, humid afternoon in early June, and she had been on her way back from picking up groceries when her engine began to sputter. With Sophie crying in the back seat and Caleb asking endless questions about why the car was making funny noises, Anna pulled into the nearest garage, a small, unassuming shop on the outskirts of Charleston. She was frazzled, tired, and wholly unprepared for the man who would change everything. Adrian Harper stepped out from beneath a lifted truck as Anna approached the counter, his hands streaked with grease and his dark hair damp with sweat. He had a disarming smile, the kind that seemed to say he had all the time in the world to listen. While Anna explained her car trouble, fumbling over her words and trying to keep an eye on her restless children, Adrian leaned against the counter, his gaze steady and attentive. "Don't worry, ma'am," he said with a slight southern drawl, his voice smooth and easy. "We'll get you fixed up in no time." It wasn't just his words, it was the way he said them, the way his presence seemed to absorb some of the tension Anna had been carrying all day. For the first time in what felt like forever, someone was looking at her, not through her, and treating her like she mattered. It was a small thing, but it lodged itself in her chest, a flicker of something she couldn't quite name. Adrian fixed her car that day, but he also planted a seed. Their initial interaction was innocent enough, a brief exchange that could have ended there. Yet, as Anna drove home, her thoughts kept drifting back to the garage and the man who had looked at her as though she were more than just a tired mother or a neglected wife. Over the next few weeks, Anna found herself making excuses to return to the garage. A strange noise in the engine, a tire that seemed slightly low on air, anything that could justify her visits. Adrian, ever the charmer, welcomed her each time with the same easy smile and light conversation. They talked about mundane things at first, her car, the weather, the challenges of keeping up with 2 young kids. But slowly, their conversations grew deeper. Anna began to share pieces of her life she hadn't spoken of in years. She told Adrian about her dreams of traveling the world, her love of painting that she had abandoned after Caleb was born, and the loneliness that had crept into her marriage. Adrian listened, his attention unwavering, and offered words that made her feel understood. He spoke of his own frustrations, his dead-end job, his struggle to find purpose, and Anna felt an unexpected kinship. What started as a harmless connection soon evolved into something more dangerous. By the end of June, Anna was no longer making excuses to see Adrian, she simply wanted to be near him. The garage became her sanctuary, a place where she could shed the weight of her responsibilities and pretend, if only for a moment, that she was free. Adrian, for his part, seemed to welcome her attention, though there was a flicker of something guarded in his demeanor. Anna didn't question it, she didn't want to. Their first physical encounter happened almost by accident. It was a particularly hot day, and Adrian had offered Anna a cold soda while they talked in the garage's small, cluttered office. As she reached for the can, their hands brushed, and the spark was undeniable. Adrian leaned closer, his voice dropping to a murmur. "You deserve to be happy, Anna," he said, his eyes locking onto hers. It was as though the dam broke. Anna hadn't realized how desperately she had needed to hear those words until that moment. When Adrian kissed her, she didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned in, letting herself get lost in the moment, in the rush of feeling wanted again. From that day on, Anna and Adrian's relationship became an intricate dance of secrecy and desire. They found ways to meet in stolen moments, afternoons when Ethan was at work, weekends when she could drop the kids at a friend's house. They avoided public places, choosing instead the anonymity of motels on the outskirts of Charleston. Each rendezvous was a fleeting escape from the monotony of Anna's life, a sliver of freedom that left her simultaneously elated and guilt-ridden. Yet, with every secret meeting, the weight of her deception grew heavier. Anna knew she was walking a dangerous line. She could see the warning signs, the way Adrian sometimes grew distant, the way guilt gnawed at her when she tucked her children into bed at night. But she pushed those thoughts aside, convincing herself that this was what she needed to feel alive again. Adrian, however, was not as simple as he appeared. While Anna viewed him as her escape, her lifeline, Adrian carried his own baggage. Whispers of a troubled past, an ex-girlfriend who had left town under mysterious circumstances, a bar fight that ended in a police report, were things Anna ignored. She didn't want to see Adrian's flaws, because doing so would mean confronting her own. As the summer stretched on, the delicate web Anna had spun began to tighten around her. Ethan remained blissfully unaware, his long hours at work providing Anna with the cover she needed. But secrets have a way of surfacing, and Anna's was no exception. The spark she had reignited with Adrian was burning brighter and hotter, but it was also consuming her, and it was only a matter of time before everything went up in flames. June 15, 2022, was one of the hottest days of the summer in Charleston, South Carolina. The temperature soared past 100 degrees Fahrenheit by midday, and the humidity made the air feel thick and suffocating. For most people in the quiet suburb of Briarwood Heights, it was a day to stay indoors, under the hum of air conditioning. But for Anna Parker, it was a day that would forever alter the course of her life. That morning had been chaotic, as usual. Caleb was whining for more cereal, Sophie had spilled juice all over the counter, and Ethan had left for work with nothing more than a quick nod in Anna's direction. She had planned to spend the day cleaning the house and catching up on laundry, but her phone buzzed with a message from Adrian. "Miss you. Can we meet today?" Usual spot. Anna's pulse quickened as she read the words. The usual spot was a rundown motel on the outskirts of Charleston, a 45-minute drive from Briarwood Heights. It wasn't glamorous, but it was private, and that was all they needed. Adrian's text offered her a chance to escape, to breathe, if only for a few stolen hours. But today was different. With no babysitter available and no friend she could call on short notice, Anna was left with one option: she would have to bring Caleb and Sophie along. She rationalized it quickly: they would stay in the car, parked in the shade, and she would only be gone for a little while. She packed a bag with snacks, water bottles, and their favorite toys, telling herself it would be fine. By the time Anna loaded the kids into her SUV and hit the road, the sun was merciless, beating down on the asphalt and shimmering off car hoods. Caleb sat in his booster seat, playing with a toy truck, while Sophie dozed off in her car seat, her little face flushed from the heat. Anna rolled the windows down slightly and turned up the AC, hoping to keep them comfortable during the drive. They arrived at the motel just before 2 p.m. The parking lot was nearly empty, save for a few battered cars. Anna pulled into a spot under what little shade a scraggly tree offered and turned off the engine. The heat immediately pressed in on her, and she hesitated for a moment, looking back at her children. Caleb was engrossed in his toy, and Sophie was still sleeping. "I won't be long," Anna murmured to herself, convincing herself that the kids would be fine. She left the windows cracked and the water bottles within reach before stepping out of the car. Inside the motel, Adrian greeted her with a lazy grin, pulling her into his arms the moment the door closed. For Anna, these moments with Adrian felt like lifelines, pulling her out of the monotony and loneliness that had become her existence. The hours slipped by as they talked, laughed, and shared fleeting moments of intimacy. But outside, the temperature inside the SUV was rising rapidly. Without the air conditioning running, the small cracks in the windows did little to keep the heat at bay. Caleb, who had been happily playing moments before, began to fidget uncomfortably, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. Sophie stirred in her sleep, her cheeks red and damp. The car became a sweltering oven, each passing minute making it harder for the children to breathe. By the time Caleb began crying weakly for his mother, his little body was drenched in sweat. Sophie, too young to voice her discomfort, grew lethargic, her head lolling to the side. Their small bodies, unable to regulate heat like adults, were succumbing to the relentless temperatures. It wasn't until nearly 4 p.m. that Anna emerged from the motel room, her mind still clouded by the rush of adrenaline and guilt. She didn't notice the stillness in the parking lot at first, didn't hear the faint sound of Sophie's shallow breathing or see the way Caleb's body slumped against the seat. It was a passerby, Claire Monroe, who saw it first. Claire had been walking her dog along the side of the road when she spotted the SUV. Something about the way the children looked, motionless, sweat-soaked, set off alarm bells in her mind. Without hesitation, she pulled out her phone and called 911. "Two kids," she told the dispatcher, her voice shaking. "They're in a car, and it's over 100 degrees out here. Please hurry." Paramedics arrived just as Anna was opening the car door, her heart dropping as she realized what had happened. Caleb was barely conscious, his small hand slipping from the water bottle he had been too weak to open. Sophie's breathing was shallow, her skin burning to the touch. Anna froze, panic overtaking her as the paramedics rushed forward, pulling the children from the sweltering vehicle. The hospital, St. Mary's in Charleston, became a blur of fluorescent lights and frantic voices. Caleb and Sophie were whisked away for emergency treatment, their conditions critical but stable. The doctors worked tirelessly to lower their body temperatures and rehydrate them, their small bodies fragile but resilient. But the damage was already done, not just to the children, but to the web of lies Anna had woven. As part of the routine hospital protocols, a DNA test was conducted to assess any potential complications for treatment. What it revealed would shatter the fragile facade of Anna's life. The children were not Ethan's. The secret Anna had fought so hard to hide was about to come crashing down, dragging everyone she loved into the fallout. The news hit Ethan Parker like a sledgehammer. Sitting in the sterile hospital waiting room of St. Mary's in Charleston, he listened in stunned silence as the doctor explained the results of the routine DNA test performed on Caleb and Sophie. The words echoed in his ears, each one slicing deeper than the last. "Mr. Parker, I'm sorry, but the results indicate that neither Caleb nor Sophie is biologically yours." For a moment, Ethan couldn't process what he was hearing. He had rushed to the hospital after receiving the frantic call from Anna, terrified for his children's lives. Now, he was being told that the very foundation of his family, his children, his legacy, was built on a lie. The room spun, and Ethan gripped the edge of his chair to steady himself. What are you saying?" he managed to choke out, his voice barely above a whisper. The doctor repeated herself, softer this time, but it did nothing to soften the blow. Ethan's mind raced, flipping through memories like a broken slideshow. Caleb's birth, Sophie's first steps, bedtime stories, and backyard games, they all felt tainted now, overshadowed by this devastating revelation. His hands clenched into fists, and his jaw tightened as a wave of anger surged through him. Anna stood across the waiting room, her arms wrapped around herself as if she could physically shield herself from Ethan's gaze. She had seen the doctor pull him aside and knew what was coming. The moment she dreaded had finally arrived, and there was no escaping it. Ethan's eyes found her, and the betrayal he felt burned like fire. He stormed across the room, his voice low but laced with fury. "Is it true?" he demanded. "Tell me, Anna. Is it true?" Anna couldn't meet his eyes. Her lips trembled, and her voice was barely audible. I can explain." "Explain?" Ethan spat the word like it was poison. "You lied to me. You made me believe they were mine. For years, Anna. For years. Who is he?" Anna's silence was answer enough. Ethan's face twisted with disgust as he pieced it together. The late nights, the mysterious errands, her growing distance, it all made sense now. The weight of her betrayal crushed him, and the anger boiled over. "You've destroyed this family," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. "Everything I've worked for, everything I've sacrificed, it was all for nothing." Anna finally looked up, tears streaming down her face. "It wasn't for nothing, Ethan. You're their father in every way that matters. Please. I can explain." But Ethan wasn't listening anymore. He turned away, pacing the room as if trying to outrun his own thoughts. The man who had always prided himself on his composure felt himself unraveling. The betrayal wasn't just about the children, it was about everything. Every moment of trust, every sacrifice, every dream they had built together. It was all a lie. The tension followed them home that night, suffocating and inescapable. The Parker household, once a place of shared meals and laughter, had become a battlefield. Ethan withdrew into himself, speaking only when necessary and avoiding Anna as much as possible. When he did speak, it was sharp and cutting, his words filled with venom. "You couldn't even be honest with me," he snapped one night as they stood in the kitchen. "You let me love those kids, knowing they weren't mine. Do you even understand what you've done?" Anna's attempts to defend herself only seemed to make things worse. "I made a mistake, Ethan," she pleaded. "But it doesn't change the fact that we're still a family. Caleb and Sophie need you." Ethan shook his head, his voice cold. "They don't need me. They need their real father." The mention of Adrian was like a slap to Anna. She had tried to keep Adrian out of this, to shield him from the fallout, but Ethan's growing suspicion was unavoidable. He began asking questions, digging into Anna's phone records, and piecing together the timeline of her betrayal. Every new discovery was another knife in his chest. The breaking point came on a stormy evening a few days later. Ethan, unable to contain his rage any longer, confronted Anna in the living room. The kids were asleep upstairs, their innocence a stark contrast to the chaos brewing below. "I want the truth, Anna," Ethan demanded. "How long? How long have you been lying to me?" Anna's tears came quickly, her voice breaking under the weight of her guilt. "It wasn't supposed to happen this way. I never meant to hurt you." "That's not an answer," Ethan roared, slamming his hand against the wall. "How long?" Anna flinched, her voice barely audible. "A year. Maybe more." Ethan turned away, his body trembling with the effort to keep himself together. "A year," he repeated bitterly. "A year of lies, of you sneaking around while I was breaking my back to provide for this family." The silence that followed was deafening. Anna could feel the distance between them growing, an unbridgeable chasm that no apology could fix. She wanted to reach out, to make him understand, but she knew it was too late. Ethan was a man pushed to his breaking point, and she was the one who had pushed him there. That night, as Ethan sat alone in the darkened living room, he made a decision. The marriage he had once cherished was gone, destroyed by deceit and betrayal. And as the storm raged outside, he vowed that Anna would face the consequences of what she had done. Unbeknownst to him, Anna was upstairs, sitting on the edge of their bed, making a decision of her own. The fear of losing everything had consumed her, and the thought of what Ethan might do next terrified her. If she couldn't save her marriage, she would do whatever it took to save herself. The stage was set for a confrontation that neither of them would walk away from unscathed. The night of June 20, 2022, carried an oppressive stillness. The storm that had battered Briarwood Heights earlier in the evening had passed, leaving behind the faint smell of rain and a heavy, humid silence. Inside the Parker household, the tension was palpable. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind against the windows, seemed amplified. Something was coming, both Anna and Ethan could feel it. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, his shoulders hunched and his fists clenched around an empty coffee mug. The house was dark except for the faint glow of the overhead light, casting long shadows across the room. He had barely eaten in days, consumed by the betrayal that had shattered his world. His mind was a whirlwind of anger, hurt, and confusion. He couldn't look at Anna without seeing the lies, the deceit, and the man she had chosen over him. Upstairs, Anna paced the bedroom, her heart pounding in her chest. The confrontation earlier that evening had been the worst yet. Ethan's accusations had grown sharper, his anger more unpredictable. She had tried to explain, to apologize, but nothing she said seemed to matter. The man she had once trusted with her life now felt like a stranger, and a dangerous one at that. Anna had heard his threats. They weren't explicit, but they lingered in the air, heavy and menacing. "You'll pay for what you've done," he had said earlier, his voice low and trembling with rage. She couldn't tell if it was an idle threat or something more, but the fear it planted in her was real. She felt trapped, like an animal backed into a corner, and her survival instincts were kicking in. She looked toward the bedside table, where a knife she had taken from the kitchen earlier lay hidden beneath a pile of folded laundry. She had brought it upstairs out of desperation, her mind racing with what-ifs. What if Ethan snapped? What if he hurt her, or worse? She didn't want to believe he was capable of such violence, but the man downstairs wasn't the Ethan she once knew. He was a man pushed to the brink, and she wasn't willing to take any chances. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, Anna made her way downstairs, the knife concealed in the folds of her sweater. She had told herself she just needed to talk to him, to calm him down, but the weight of the blade in her hand told a different story. If it came to it, she would protect herself. Ethan didn't look up as she entered the kitchen. He sat motionless, staring at the empty mug in front of him. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator. Anna hesitated in the doorway, her grip tightening around the knife. "Ethan," she began, her voice trembling. "We need to talk." He finally looked up, his eyes bloodshot and filled with a cold fury that sent a chill down her spine. "Talk?" he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You want to talk now, Anna? After everything you've done?" Anna took a cautious step forward. "I know I've hurt you. I know I've broken your trust. But we can't go on like this. We have to figure out a way to move forward." Ethan let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "Move forward? With what? Lies and betrayal? There's nothing left to move forward with, Anna. You destroyed it all." The conversation quickly escalated. Words became accusations, and accusations became shouting. Ethan rose from his chair, his towering frame casting a long shadow over Anna. She backed away instinctively, her heart pounding as he stepped closer. "Do you even know what you've done to me? To our family?" he demanded, his voice cracking with emotion. "I gave you everything, Anna. Everything. And this is how you repay me? I didn't mean for it to happen." Anna cried, tears streaming down her face. "I made a mistake, Ethan. I was lost, and Adrian. Don't you say his name." Ethan roared, slamming his fist against the table. The sound echoed through the house, startling Anna. In that moment, Anna felt the knife pressing against her side, hidden beneath the fabric of her sweater. Her mind raced. She didn't want it to come to this, but the fear in her chest was unbearable. Ethan's anger was like a tidal wave, and she was drowning in it. "Ethan, please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry." But Ethan wasn't listening. He stepped closer, his expression a mixture of rage and anguish. "You ruined everything, Anna. And now you're going to." The knife flashed as Anna pulled it from her sweater, the steel catching the faint kitchen light. She didn't think, she just reacted. She swung the blade in a wide arc, hoping to keep Ethan at bay, but he was faster. He grabbed her wrist, twisting it with enough force to make her cry out in pain. The knife clattered to the floor between them. For a moment, they both froze, their heavy breathing filling the room. Then, as if on instinct, Ethan lunged for the knife. Anna moved to stop him, but in the chaos, he grabbed the blade and turned it toward her. There was a brief struggle, their movements frantic and uncoordinated, and then it happened. The knife plunged into Anna's chest. She gasped, her eyes wide with shock as the color drained from her face. Ethan released her immediately, stepping back as she stumbled, her hand clutching the wound. Blood seeped through her fingers, pooling on the floor as she collapsed. "Anna," Ethan whispered, his voice breaking. He dropped the knife and fell to his knees beside her, his hands trembling. "Oh my God. Anna. The room grew quiet, save for the steady drip of blood hitting the tiles. Ethan sat frozen, his mind struggling to comprehend what he had just done. The woman he had once loved lay lifeless before him, and the weight of his actions pressed down on him like a crushing tide. When the police arrived later that night, called by concerned neighbors who heard the shouting, they found Ethan sitting on the floor of the kitchen, his clothes soaked in blood. He didn't resist as they placed him in handcuffs. He didn't say a word. The house on Shady Glen, once a home filled with the sounds of family, was now silent, a crime scene lit by flashing red and blue lights. The tragedy was complete, and the fallout had only just begun. The morning after the tragedy, the Parker home on Shady Glen had transformed into a flurry of police activity. Yellow crime scene tape fluttered in the humid breeze, cordoning off the once cozy home that now stood as a grim reminder of the events that had unfolded the night before. Neighbors gathered in small, murmuring groups along the sidewalk, their faces pale with shock. Briarwood Heights was a quiet town, a place where nothing truly terrible was supposed to happen. But now, it was the epicenter of a story that would soon grip the entire community. Inside the house, investigators worked methodically, cataloging evidence and photographing the bloody scene. The kitchen floor, once a place of family dinners, was now stained with Anna's blood, the knife that had ended her life lying discarded nearby. Ethan Parker had already been taken into custody, his clothes and hands still marked with the evidence of his actions. At the Briarwood Heights police station, Ethan sat in an interrogation room, his head in his hands. He had barely spoken since his arrest, only murmuring Anna's name as officers escorted him to the car. Now, under the harsh fluorescent lights, he faced the unrelenting questions of Detective Marcus Lang, a seasoned investigator who had seen his fair share of domestic disputes turn deadly. "Mr. Parker," Lang began, his tone steady but firm. "You need to help us understand what happened last night. Your wife is dead, and you were found at the scene with her blood on your hands. What happened?" Ethan looked up, his eyes hollow. "It wasn't supposed to happen," he said, his voice cracking. She came at me. She had the knife." Lang leaned forward, his gaze unyielding. "You're saying this was self-defense?" Ethan nodded slowly, the weight of his confession pressing down on him. "I didn't mean to hurt her. I was trying to stop her." Lang studied him for a moment before nodding to his partner, who stepped out of the room. The detectives had already begun piecing together the events of that night, but the story was far from complete. The testimony of neighbors, Anna's recent behavior, and Ethan's history would all play crucial roles in unraveling the truth. As detectives delved deeper into the Parkers' lives, they uncovered a series of revelations that painted a complex picture of the events leading up to Anna's death. Phone records revealed a flurry of messages between Anna and Adrian Harper, including those sent on the day of the tragedy. The messages, laced with intimacy and desperation, provided a glimpse into Anna's state of mind and the secret life she had been leading. Adrian, summoned for questioning, admitted to the affair but denied any involvement in Anna's death. She was scared, he told investigators. She said Ethan had been acting different. Like he was losing control. She didn't feel safe. Neighbors corroborated some of Adrian's claims, recounting the escalating tension between Anna and Ethan in the weeks before her death. One neighbor, an older woman named Mrs. Gallagher, told police she had overheard shouting on multiple occasions. "It was bad," she said. "I could tell they were both at their breaking points." The evidence painted a picture of a marriage in freefall. Anna, consumed by guilt and fear, had become increasingly erratic in her actions. Ethan, blindsided by the revelation of her infidelity and the truth about the children, had been pushed to the brink. But it was Anna's decision to confront Ethan with a knife that became the pivotal question in the case. Had Ethan acted in self-defense, or was this a cold-blooded killing fueled by rage? The trial began on September 12, 2022, at the Charleston County Courthouse. The media descended on Briarwood Heights, turning the once quiet town into a hotbed of speculation and debate. Headlines called it the Parker tragedy, and reporters dug into every aspect of Ethan and Anna's lives, searching for answers to a question that seemed to have no easy resolution. The prosecution portrayed Ethan as a man consumed by jealousy and betrayal. They painted a picture of a husband whose world had crumbled when he discovered the truth about his wife's affair and the paternity of their children. This was not self-defense, the prosecutor argued in his opening statement. This was murder, plain and simple. A calculated act of revenge by a man who couldn't handle the truth. The defense, led by attorney Julia Sanders, countered with a different narrative. They described Ethan as a loving husband and father who had been pushed to his limits by Anna's actions. This was a tragic accident, Sanders argued. Ethan Parker is not a murderer. He is a man who acted in the heat of the moment, defending himself from a situation he didn't create. Testimonies from both sides laid bare the intimate details of the Parkers' marriage. Adrian Harper took the stand, his calm demeanor betraying little emotion. Under cross-examination, he admitted to knowing Anna had been afraid of Ethan but denied encouraging her to take any drastic measures. "Did you know she had a knife that night?" Sanders asked, her voice sharp. "No," Adrian replied. "She didn't tell me anything about that." The neighbors' testimonies added fuel to both sides. Some described Ethan as a devoted father, while others pointed to his recent outbursts and erratic behavior. The jury listened intently, their faces betraying little as each piece of evidence was presented. On October 10, 2022, after weeks of testimony and hours of deliberation, the jury delivered their verdict, not guilty. Ethan Parker was acquitted on the grounds of self-defense, a decision that left the courtroom in stunned silence. For Ethan, the verdict brought no relief. He had lost everything, his wife, his family, and the life he had spent years building. Caleb and Sophie, too young to understand the full scope of what had happened, would grow up without their mother and with the shadow of the tragedy looming over them. For Briarwood Heights, the case left a lasting scar. The town that once prided itself on its peace and quiet was now marked by whispers and divided opinions. Some saw Ethan as a victim, a man pushed too far by his wife's betrayal. Others saw him as a murderer who had escaped justice. In the end, the Parker tragedy became a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of how secrets, lies, and unchecked emotions could destroy everything in their wake. And as Ethan walked out of the courthouse, free but broken, he carried with him the weight of a life forever changed. The Parker tragedy left an indelible mark on Briarwood Heights, its shadow stretching far beyond the yellowed pages of court documents and the fleeting buzz of media coverage. For the town, it became a story told in whispers, a grim reminder of how the illusion of a perfect family could shatter under the weight of secrets and betrayal. For Ethan, it was a wound that time would never fully heal. Ethan returned to his home on Shady Glen a free man, but he was far from unburdened. The house, once filled with the warmth of family, now felt like a hollow shell. The cheerful laughter of Caleb and Sophie echoed faintly in his memories, but even their presence couldn't fill the void left by Anna's absence. Every room held a piece of her, a forgotten scarf draped over the back of a chair, her favorite mug still sitting in the cupboard. Ethan couldn't escape her presence, nor could he escape the questions that haunted him. Had it been his fault? Could he have saved his marriage if he had been more attentive, more present? Or had Anna's choices set them on a path that neither of them could have diverted? These questions circled endlessly in his mind, their answers forever out of reach. For Caleb and Sophie, life would never be the same. Too young to comprehend the full extent of what had happened, they only knew that their mother was gone and their father seemed like a different man. Ethan did his best to shield them from the whispers of neighbors and the curious glances of strangers, but the weight of the tragedy was something they would carry with them as they grew. The town, too, wrestled with the aftermath. Conversations over coffee and at church potlucks often returned to the Parkers. Some residents sympathized with Ethan, seeing him as a man pushed to his breaking point by betrayal. Others condemned him, believing that no amount of provocation could justify taking a life. The community, once tightly knit, found itself fractured by the differing perspectives on what had truly happened in that kitchen on the night of June 20, 2022. The case also raised broader questions about relationships, honesty, and the quiet struggles that many families endure behind closed doors. Anna's affair and the lies that followed weren't just acts of betrayal, they were cries for help, born out of a deep dissatisfaction with her life. Ethan's detachment and inability to communicate his emotions only compounded the problem. Together, their choices created a perfect storm that ultimately destroyed them both. For those watching from the outside, the Parker tragedy offered a sobering lesson about the consequences of unspoken resentment and unchecked emotions. It was a reminder that even the most seemingly stable relationships could crumble if the foundations weren't strong. Communication, trust, and a willingness to confront problems head-on were essential, not just for the survival of a marriage, but for the well-being of everyone involved. As time passed, the media moved on to other stories, and the Parker tragedy faded from the national spotlight. But for those closest to it, the scars remained. Ethan continued to raise Caleb and Sophie as best he could, navigating the challenges of single fatherhood while carrying the weight of his past. He rarely spoke about Anna, except in the quiet moments before bedtime, when the children asked about her. "She loved you," he would say, his voice heavy with emotion. "She loved you more than anything." The house on Shady Glen, once a symbol of suburban perfection, became a cautionary tale. To those who passed by, it stood as a reminder of how quickly a life could unravel when secrets and lies took root. For Ethan, it was both a prison and a sanctuary, a place where he could remember and mourn, but never truly escape. The story of the Parker family is one of love, betrayal, and the devastating consequences of choices made in desperation. It's a tale that forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the fragility of human relationships and the importance of honesty, even when it's difficult. But what do you think? Do you believe Ethan acted purely in self-defense, or was his anger a factor in Anna's death? Could Anna and Ethan have salvaged their marriage if they had addressed their issues sooner? What role does Adrian Harper play in this tragedy? Should he share some of the blame? And finally, could this all have been avoided if the Parkers had communicated openly from the start? We'd love to hear your thoughts on this tragic story. Leave a comment below and let us know what you think. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on more stories like this one. Thank you for watching, and let's continue the conversation.